So with that being said, I want to welcome the AIBlock team to the stage. How's everything going with you today? Would love to get a brief intro of the person behind the account as we get started here.
Hey, yeah, so this is Byron speaking from the AIBlock team. I'm officially the head of product, but due to the nature of startups and generally the small headcounts that they have, my role has spanned a lot of different areas, and I've been very involved in the engineering and setup of the chain. So we're a new layer one. And these days, I'm kind of looking at more around how to take that chain and kind of make it more useful, bringing some utility to it, and bring something new and fresh to the blockchain and Web3 space.
All right, perfect. Thanks, Byron. Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about it. And I encourage people to go and check out the website while we're talking here. I'm also going to pin the Zeely campaign to the top of the space so people can go ahead and check that out. I know that post was put up about a week ago on the 9th, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get it to the top of the space. And I see my buddies Kyle and Crypto Sensei joining up now as well. Perfect. Okay, so let's roll into this with a little bit of a chat here. And just starting out with kind of the message of this company. Your marketing message states, you have a two-way or a dual entry blockchain. Probably not a lot of people have heard of a dual entry blockchain. What does that even mean? And why do you believe it is a key and important feature of what you are building here?
Yeah, so I think the best way to describe this is to give a bit of a background as to how chains work currently, because I think that will like sort of cement the idea a bit better. Like currently, if Alice sends Bob some Bitcoin, like let's say 5 Bitcoin for pizza or something like that, it reflects on the chain as like charity. Alice just gives Bob the 5 Bitcoin. There's no, I guess you could call it, let's say, counter receipts or anything from the other side of the ledger to say that this was in fact a slice of pizza and not, I don't know, maybe like a pound of cocaine or something like that. So at the moment, what happens is that all blockchains essentially reflect transactions as one way. And what would be ideal is if you could actually take these distributed ledgers and supply it as a two-way ledger so that the ledger itself reflects something that is probably a little bit closer to traditional accounting, where you can actually see what a token was traded for. In our case, on our chain, that is generally for an item, which can be sort of anything. It can be a unique token. It could be an actual receipt. So some people are, in our wallet, for example, we've got a feature where people can kind of manually accept or reject payments with a counter receipt, invoices, anything like that, where you would want to see the result of some trade as not just the sending of tokens, but the sending of tokens in exchange for something else. This is quite a big deal because what it means is like you can essentially start to affect trades and create items on chain without the need for smart contracts in the first place. You can just do it, directly to chain. Which is a lot more in kind of like the Bitcoin spirit of things and a lot less like the Ethereum account style structure.
Interesting. So maybe it's better to get some more high level here. So if you were explaining this product to somebody that was, let's say, even like new to Web3, and you wanted to put it in super simple, understandable terms, what the value add is, what's kind of the elevator pitch there?
The elevator pitch for us is like the blockchain structure that we have is so simple that you don't need to be in Web3 to use it. You can be a Web2 person, or you can be a developer that knows nothing about Web3, and you can build on us. On top of that, we have XGP, which I'll go into a little bit later. And what we're doing with that is once you're on the system, using whatever approaches or whatever tools that you're already using in a traditional environment, you can also secure your data rights and data ownership on our chain as like an additional benefit. But that I think would be sort of the 5-second elevator pitch. It's bringing Web3 to a Web2 audience.
Very nice. All right. See action in the audience. I just shot you an invite as well to get you on stage. So let's talk about the key feature here, right? You state smart contracts are not required for most transactions in trade. How is the functional equivalent solution enabled by AIBlock here? What are the advantages thereof of not using these smart contracts?
So yeah, I mean, I don't want to go on too big a bashing of or rant on smart contracts, but obviously, look, smart contracts have a lot of problems. There's a lot of challenges that need to be overcome when implementing smart contracts. The original kind of dream, obviously, was that they were meant to be sort of cutting out the middleman. And I think for projects where they kind of do have a good grasp on how smart contract systems work, that's okay. But I think for most people, and definitely for people that have no awareness of Web3, no crypto knowledge, this is all kind of voodoo to them. Smart contracts are kind of scary. And the only way that they can get a smart contract done, for example, is by hiring expensive smart contract developers, in which case you're kind of introducing this middleman in again. And even when you do have these smart contracts set up, we've seen it time and time again over the years where there's a lot of sometimes it's just plain human error. Sometimes there are bugs. Sometimes there are attacks on the smart contracts that are successful. So there's a lot of kind of, I guess, risk inherent in using smart contracts in the first place that you can kind of, I guess, avoid in our system.
Okay, got it. We'll probably have to dive a little bit deeper into that, but let's talk about the developer side real quick, because developers can integrate their DApp with AIBlock, which is some of this next level of how this is working. And you also still can support smart contracts, right? I think it's all about optionality here. So walk me through, from a developer's perspective, how they would integrate.
Yeah, so at the moment, like our focus has mostly been on actually API routes. So the nodes in the network themselves, so they interface with the outside world directly through API, no RPC. So this means that for your average developer, in other words, like I'm just saying now, a Web2 developer, someone that knows nothing about Web3, they can integrate with the system through the API routes and generally through the languages that they already know. So there's no requirement for a developer who wants to connect their DApp to AIBlock to know, for example, Solidity or like Cosmos or some domain-specific language. We've set ourselves up with a JavaScript SDK, PHP, and we're developing others as we go. But if developers want to write directly onto those API routes, they can. And they don't need any kind of specialist knowledge to get going. They can actually take an ordinary Web2 app and turn it into a DApp without a lot of effort. And as you mentioned, of course, there is this push to, I wouldn't say EVM compatibility, but portability is kind of our approach that we're pushing for. That's not quite in yet. That's kind of like, let's say, 6 months out. But our hope is to kind of allow people that are interested in the crypto space. Obviously, look, Ethereum is a huge ecosystem, so people want to be at least able to integrate with that ecosystem. So for us, portability and that level of compatibility with that ecosystem makes a lot of sense. So it's not just about getting Web2 devs on. We also are trying to get that integration with the Ethereum ecosystem as well.
Got it. Okay, so you are trying to have support there as well. All right, so follow-up question from that. I want to talk about the key features here, right? Especially for those developers. What is the attraction to them here? Why would they use this over another platform or integration?
I think it's basically just, it boils down to the developer user experience. That's really it. So if you want a much easier time developing stuff in a blockchain environment or in a Web3 environment, then we're kind of the go-to. Our entire sort of product approach at this stage has been to match actually almost like a Stripe style user experience, but obviously with a Web3 focus. So we're very interested in essentially providing things like playgrounds, integration toolkits, SDKs, and all of these nice to have from a developer user experience perspective in order to make that UX as simple and as seamless as possible. And then obviously, the compatibility with the Ethereum ecosystem speaks to that. So it's not necessarily that we are offering, something entirely new and different from everybody else, but we're trying to make the developer experience as seamless and as comfortable as possible. And in that way, we can kind of hopefully tap into the community of Web2 developers that is obviously much, much larger than the current community of Web3 developers.
Got it. I wanted to zoom back out for a second because I realized we didn't dive too much into this. Can you talk to us about who the team is behind this, who's building it, if people wanted to go and check out, who they were and their profiles, where they would find them and things like that?
Yeah, so I'll just go at a high level through all the main people. Our CEO is Mervyn Eagles. He's actually involved with Ferrari in South Africa for many years. Most of us either come from South Africa or from Poland. So the team is quite mixed, and he's not very active on social media. You can find him around. But definitely those that are active are Peter Bauer, our COO. He worked as CEO of SAP for Africa for many, many years. And he's been involved in the tech industry for decades. Comes with a wealth of business experience. Our CFO, Ivona, she has been involved in the crypto space specifically for many years. Very involved with the Ethereum, the guys that set up Ethereum here in Zug. And of course, our CTO, Andrew Kessler, who is just an all-around bona fide genius and has been the guy who's essentially come up with a lot of the technology that I've then implemented. So between him and I, it's been, I guess, a longish tech journey, but yeah, finally coming to fruition.
Very cool. Very cool. I'm going to probably bring in Kayla or Action in a minute. I just want to get another question or two into here. I'm curious why you think the world needs a full stack blockchain solution, really what the advantage or benefit is.
Yeah, I can give a very dev-centric answer, which is that like this is kind of the approach that Node.js took with JavaScript, which was to take JavaScript as a single language from front end to the back end and everywhere in between. The benefits for this from, let's say, a utility perspective, from a business perspective, is that I don't need developers who are specialized in different areas of blockchain development. I don't need people who know different, smart contracts here, integrations with wallets there. All of it is existing under one sort of ecosystem and tech stack. And so I don't need to learn multiple different specialties, and I don't need to hire people that know different specialties in order to get some actual work done. And I think that's really, for me personally, that's the biggest motivating factor for having a full stack solution, layer 0 to layer 2.
Perfect. All right, Kayla, jump in.
Yeah, so this is really interesting. I've been trying to build an idea around developers and researchers not having to work together, which sounds a little dystopian, but the reality is there's a lot of lagging around that. And it's also just very hard, even though it'd be great. So I guess your guys' project is more focused on the integration of blockchain. So I'm I'm still not exactly sure how you could avoid enabling the smart contracts, and I think that's what I heard, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that we like. It's not that we won't have smart contracts at all. It's just that we don't. It's not that we don't believe. We've managed to set up a system that doesn't need it for most things. So for the creation of items, for things that connect to, let's say, real world assets or data off chain with an on chain governance component, things like this, that kind of stuff doesn't really. It doesn't need smart contracts. And even trades, we have these two-way trades where people can kind of set up trade expectations, match them, and then it's an atomic swap of assets. This kind of stuff doesn't require smart contracts. But having said that, there are things like, for example, and actually this is one of the use cases we're working with right now, where if you need things like, for example, an on-chain futures contract for a commodity, then yeah, you do need a smart contract, and that's exactly the right use case for it. So it's not that we don't do smart contracts, it's just that we try and minimize smart contracts to the use cases where they're actually appropriate.
Okay, I got it. So that's actually very interesting. Is that because you're trying to get like garner more of the Web 2 and Web 3 market?
Yeah, exactly. Even for us, like, so I don't want to go too deeply into this unless we want to explore it right now. But for example, what we're doing now with one use case on the commodity side, we're finding that if we set up what's like it's a forwards contract, which is just futures contract OTC on the actor standard, then it also makes us compliant to a certain degree with like TradFi banks, which is really cool. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's exactly what I'm wondering. So this is more focused on stocks, bonds, commodities, and it's just a
exactly.
different smart contract, which is for tokenized assets. So my question then would be: is there like learn to earn type features planned? And I say learn to earn loosely because it's just a token model.
Yeah, exactly. So, like, what we've essentially come up with for this specific use case, I'll go a bit into it. We've essentially come up with I'm loosely calling it because we actually haven't even labeled it yet, but it's essentially sort of like a modular VM for specific use cases. So rather than having like a general purpose EVM, you could have a virtual machine that specifically compiles commodities contracts so that all parties are aware of the risks. And then you could simulate the results of the futures contract ahead of time before everybody agrees, this kind of stuff, right? And then you could kind of codify that as part of an item on chain. And I think that's speaking more to what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I need you to make it so that I can continue building my immutable data. That's actually the reality of this, right? So, my last question that I have until action goes is how are you going to handle data privacy? Because that's been my biggest research hurdle so far. Specifically, what kind of encryption with these kinds of platforms. If you want safe data on it, that's been my biggest hurdle because you need like homographic encryption, and that's a lot of compute, especially with AI.
Yes. So this is actually, I mean, the project when we originally started developing it actually focused on this aspect first. The other stuff came later. And we'd come up with a way to, like, the problem with chains, of course, is that you can't just, like, ideally it would be cool if we could just chuck all of our data on chain, but that's not really practical. So the solution we essentially came up with was to create a way for off-chain data to be encrypted and encoded in such a way that you would need an on-chain component to access it. Because if you can do that, then you can essentially put the governance of your data on the chain. So that's kind of the second part. That's kind of the second, I guess, USP for us is this what we're calling the XGP, the Extensible Gateway Protocol, and that is essentially exactly what you need, right? You need a way for people to our solution, obviously homomorphic encryption is down the road, but our solution at this stage is to look at ways of encrypting or at least controlling access to the data with an on-chain signing component. And by doing it this way, we can kind of give a little bit more security to
Oh my gosh,
yeah.
that is genius. That's incredible. Especially if it was tokens, I would buy that. I would buy that.
Yeah, it's for me personally, I think this is other than great dev UX, this is the big thing for me that I think we can offer the world.
That's awesome. I love that.
That's great. Action, you got some thoughts here?
Yes. Can you hear me okay, by the way?
Yes.
Oh, phenomenal. Yeah, sorry, new setup in Dubai. Now here's my
Oh, how's that?
big question.
How's the weather out there?
Oh, it's phenomenal. It's lovely from my hotel room. I don't have to go out anywhere, so it's great. Other than that, people are suffering a little bit outside. I'm not gonna lie. So flights canceled, all sorts of things. People are having a tough time out there. But talking about getting people involved in this sort of thing, because you have a really good value prop for a lot of devs that don't want to deal with any of this stuff and builders that are in the space. But how do you get the general public to kind of buy into what you're selling? Because ultimately, for you to be found, you need kind of a mass market approach for people to understand what you're doing in the first place. It was like perfect example is Kayla, right? She was like, I would buy this. I would buy this. But how would Kayla ever find out about it if you weren't on this wolf space? Like, what are you doing to make sure that people are actually getting into this ecosystem and trying it out?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. We've for me personally, I've been spending so much time kind of building that this hasn't really been a focus for me, but which is a bit backwards, right? Because most like Web3 products, they kind of start with the marketing first and then they move to the tech. And we've done things kind of ass backwards. So the tech is there, but now the goal is now we need to market this thing and make sure people actually understand who we are, what we're offering. A lot of this for us is like, okay, we're going through the traditional Web3 routes, but then we're also looking like, okay, cool. Like, are we talking to Web2 devs in their space rather than trying to pull them into our space? And then it kind of speaks to what I was saying before, with the tooling specifically for Web2 devs. I think it's like if you're wanting to get people on board, it's really important that you speak their language rather than trying to get them to speak yours. And I think that's kind of at least one of the components of this. The rest is, I think it's to a certain degree, and I'm really speaking out of turn for myself here, but I think it's just about raising awareness and making sure that we're offering great products and making sure that the people are using those products and that we're actually learning something from the way that they use them, so that we can improve them further. So I think in that way, like it's a very much more like traditional software approach, I suppose. But yeah, I think that's like the marketing aspect of this is now the biggest challenge that we need to overcome.
So you're saying that you did it not the Web3 route, because usually what happens, people have an idea, they launch token, they raise a bunch of money, and then they rug everybody. Or some of them build, not all of them, but some of them do. So you basically built the product first before trying to go to market.
Yeah, I don't know if that was necessarily the smartest way to do it, but that is the way we've gone. Yeah.
It's the most noble way to do it. I'll tell you, it's what I wish most people would do out there. And it's like you said, usually the backwards, right? But the more people that do it the way that you do it, this is the easiest way to explain it. It's like pre-sale for games. It's like give people your money and the idea that you might get a good game later on. It doesn't always work that way, especially in blockchain. And the more people that realize that that's the case, the better off this space is going to be. Kayla, go for it.
Yeah, I agree, Action, for sure. And if you need, good eyes, I think this is the best place to get it. Like you can build all the time, or I'm sorry, you can market always, but it's so important when you build and how you build. And I think you guys are well positioned for the market as far as time goes. So specifically because integrating AI into smart contracts and all that jazz is huge right now, specifically for developers and all that. So my question is, do you have some kind of a custom AI model system that's integrated into these technologies like TensorFlow and PyTorch that could help me like with an agentic system?
Not yet. That is kind of like the hope going forward. At this stage, we're focusing more on the data aspect at this stage and securing that first. But obviously, like, the natural next step is we need to then take what we're doing for the data and integrate it into the ML stuff. Because the data is kind of the base layer. So as soon as we've got that going, then we can start to look at, I mean, for me, personally as well, I think the homomorphic encryption stuff is very, very interesting and is a very good way to go in terms of all of that. But yeah, at this stage, there's no specific integrations for things.
Yeah, and I think that's smart, to be clear, because I write grants and I suggest that people build small ideas into their big idea and actually not pitch the big idea. But long term, I think we were talking about like how this would be good from a developer point of view. I think eventually you could offer APIs and SDKs that allow developers to integrate the models into these things, and that's of course more Web3. But when people invest, that they're looking for the whole picture. And then when funding comes for grants and stuff, they're looking for small things they can invest in. So I think you guys are super well positioned for that.
Yeah, thanks.
Great point.
So if you don't mind me, like, Kayla just talked about small ideas versus big ideas. If you had to sum it up as far as an elevator pitch for what you guys are building, what would it be without confusing people? Because that's the hardest part, right? Like, it's easy for you to keep going and talking about all the cool things you're building, but What is it that will move the needle and get people to actually understand what you guys are up to?
That's a great question. People always ask it. There's always a different answer, and I'm never sure which one the right one is. But I think the shortest response that I can kind of give to that, I think, is probably a way for the Web2 world to integrate with Web3 benefits, specifically around data, and that's kind of it, like full stop. And yeah, the problem with that statement is like it's quite vague, and you need to kind of unpack it quite a lot. But I think if I had to boil things down to a one-liner, that would probably be it.
All right, let's see if we change that one-liner by the end of the space. Wolf, go for it.
What's going on, man? Anything on your mind?
Hey, how are you? Appreciate everybody being here, and a lot of great familiar faces, some fun conversations, and I think this is a really interesting model. I know you've talked about it a little bit here, but could you kind of walk me through your perspective on layer 0, layer 1, layer 2, and like, is there a cap on how many layers that we bring into this, or like at what point does this kind of like how does this infrastructure grow over time? I don't want to use the word scale because I'm sure you're going to use that word to describe the different layers and how they interact with each other, but like, how do we prevent this infrastructure from becoming complicated for complication's sake, and really build something that's practical from that sense? Just because I come from the context of tech debt is a real thing, and I look at traditional financial infrastructure, and they honestly use systems that are incredibly outdated, but the reason why is because they still work. And so a lot of the complexities that we're adding today do require a lot of maintenance to maintain. So just want to hear your perspective on the kind of the ladder of different layers of blockchain systems, and what that looks like moving forward.
Yeah, that's a super deep question, actually. That's 100% true. I think it's also one of the big reasons why Web3 stuff hasn't gotten such great. Actually, it's not even a Web3 thing. I think anything that's decentralized in nature is quite difficult to adopt because the user experience is more fragmented across different services, and so people don't really know always how to interact with things. One really good example that's not Web3 is Mastodon versus Twitter, right? So it's not just a Web3 problem, but obviously Web3 has to deal with it because it's fundamental to the way that technology works. And it's true because the more you write, the more code you write, the more you have to maintain, and the more you need to keep alive for longer. I think what Web3 does a little bit differently to standard decentralized systems is they include like a reward or incentive structure generally. So if you incentivize participants in the network to participate, then you have people who are kind of also incentivized to keep the system running and to maintain and improve it. I think that's worked generally pretty well for a number of projects, maybe not many, but I think it helps. For us specifically, I mean, the focus, certainly I would say, let's say layer 0, layer 1, is to make sure that the chain itself is able to handle a lot of the, I guess you could say kind of like external dependencies in such a way that outside people can kind of connect to the chain, and the chain has these endpoints that external things can connect to. So one big example would be, can I get an Ethereum smart contract to at least be recognized by the AI blockchain? Sufficiently enough that I could, for example, swap BTC for ETH in a non-custodial manner using just the AI blockchain. That would be a really interesting way to do layer 0. That is the way we're looking at doing it. And then all the way up to let's say layer 2, where we've got a special, and I won't go into too much detail, but we've got a special node called the valence node, which sits at layer 2, and that anybody can run and spin up. in order to, for example, set up their own custom marketplaces with their own order books, their own bid-ask spreads, everything that they need kind of, let's say, at the click of a button, but without them needing to know too much about how the layer one works. So I think in summary, the long-winded way of getting to my answer is to say that I think it's a really good idea if you've got a lot to manage, to make sure that people who are managing their section are well incentivized to just manage their section, and they can do their job without really worrying about other layers in the stack. Because if you can do that, then the whole system should function reasonably well enough that life goes on.
I appreciate that response. I know that I kind of gave you a pretty metaphysical question there. I certainly have a habit of doing that on these types of spaces, just because I like to hear, from expert opinions on some of these deeper topics, as well as just their solutions. So I think that to take that a step further, and I see that there's some other hands too, so I don't want to take up the whole space, but how does then your solution kind of fit into that puzzle with all of these different, layers of blockchains coming out and different solutions? How do you see this interoperability happening over time? And how do you kind of work with other solutions that are also trying to kind of intermediate between all the different players that are on chain and off chain?
Slowly. I think it requires quite a long roadmap, and it takes quite a bit of work. I think, as I said before, I think what Web3 has done really well in general is it's okay. It's got the decentralized tech and everything, but it also tends to focus very strongly, when done correctly, on game theory, right? So making sure that the incentives are strongly aligned. For some of us, for some of the use cases, that means making sure that if there's multiple tokens at play, that both token ecosystems are kind of improved, like from a game theory perspective, through the collaboration, and that it's not zero sum. In other places, I think, for things like Web2 integration, that's quite tricky, and I think it needs to. The way we're approaching it currently is to do it on like a use case by use case basis. So our start is to go, okay, we're doing sort of, let's say, data management, we're doing financial contracts, and even there we're narrowing down to commodities first, and then growing out, I think, as the need arises. Because I think if you try and eat the elephant whole, you're going to struggle. You need to eat it one bite at a time. So yeah, I think that's kind of the way to take it, and push it in the direction where the community wants it to go, as well as the communities that our community engages with.
Right. I think that's a super measured response, and appreciate your time. I see Kayla's got her hands up. Kayla, what's on your mind?
Yeah, I agree. Like I've noticed you guys are doing the eat it one bite at a time thing, so I really like that. My question is, as somebody who owns the data, right, and now I have the ability to give access to my data, how does that work? Kind of like a private data storage node?
Actually, we don't even specify in our current structure how the data should be necessarily stored. The way we used to tell people that they could do it, just to be cheeky, was to say that they could even store it on their enemy's computer, because unless you have the on-chain component, you can't do anything with the data. It's completely encrypted. The way that we kind of saw this going forward is that you could do things like you could rent data encoding streams for a certain amount of time to people, or I guess, not putting a cost or token component to it. You could do it for free, so it would essentially just be like, I'm lending it to you. You can just use it for a certain amount of time, or alternatively, giving people generalized access to something to be able to access it, but being able to revoke that access by on-spending it through a transaction on-chain. So you could give people access to it for as long as you wanted them to have access to it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, just like a revocable link, almost like when I have Google Dropbox, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Very cool. So like the Web3 Dropbox.
Yes, actually, that's not a bad description. Yeah. Yeah, so we actually had it where, at one point when we were doing sort of UI integration, we had it where people could encode data and then they could choose where they want to drop it off. So we would provide, let's say, an S3 bucket on AWS, your Dropbox, you could put it on your Google Drive. It doesn't really matter where it lives. It's more about the ability to control access and ownership.
That's a huge solution for me because because I share a lot of data with my Web3 friends and none of us want to download Google. So that's huge.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So, talking about data here, are we going to see a Web3 data bucket that we might be able to drop things into? Just because I know there are players out there in the market, there's a lot of available space throughout Web3, and people are looking to get used so they can get paid. So, is there upcoming integrations with Web3 storage?
Yes, actually, the first integrations we were looking at, back in the day, we were looking kind of at Filecoin, but more recently, we've been looking at Arweave as the first integration point. But we have no specific integration partners in mind. We're kind of looking at ways for people to integrate whatever their preferred data service provider happens to be, whether it's Web2 or Web3. It's not prescribed.
Yes, Kayla, you have to go. You made him
Filecoin
laugh.
for sure over Arweave. That's all.
Okay, noted.
All right, let me throw another quick question into the mix here, and then I'll bring it back over to others if they do have thoughts here too. I want to talk about transaction speed and fees and how you'll compete with the rest of the field in respect to those.
Yeah, so we've got obviously a bunch of so I'll give you a state of the nation as to where we are now currently. Our fee structure is basically based around fees that would go to the nodes that act as infrastructure for the network. And I'm sort of very vague in that statement because we don't have, like usual blockchains, a node that does everything. What we've done is we've split the responsibilities for the nodes into separate node types, all of which obviously need to be rewarded in the system in order for them to keep contributing. So the fee is kind of split between these, along with block reward, but the fees are kept intentionally low. So currently we're aiming for, I believe it's somewhere around 0.002 cents per transaction. That will change in the future once we integrate more Oracle systems to be able to kind of like quote unquote peg the fee to a dollar amount. Again, the thinking behind that is that we want to be a little bit more palatable for Web2, people that are not used to essentially watching crypto tickers constantly and want to be able to run a business where they can kind of project costs. And that's kind of the approach there. But the general idea is to keep the fees very, very low and very, very attractive. We're not aiming, obviously, for the very, very bottom of the stack, but we are not trying to be, Ethereum 2.0, where you're charged like, I don't know, $10 to $100 per transaction. In terms of transaction speed, we have actually somewhat uniquely for a blockchain, we have a deterministic block time. So we mint a block every 30 seconds because of the structure of the network. And we're averaging at the moment about 8,000 TPS. But obviously, we have kind of improvement proposals in place to increase that going forward. But that's kind of where we are at this stage.
Perfect. Yeah, appreciate the answer there. I think that makes sense and sounds like there's more coming to it. One of the other things which you've talked about is that the AIBlock consensus is called Eco POW, right? That proof of work, which is widely known for its wasteful energy requirements, can be counterintuitive. Talk to me about how AIBlock's consensus POW is achieving energy efficiency, right? How does this compare to the proof of stake? And what really informed your decision to pursue this POW style consensus? You've touched on this a little bit, but maybe you can just flesh it out.
Yeah, for us, so we're not like fans of proof of stake at all in general. There's a number of reasons for that. The main one being that proof of stake seems to reward kind of like a rich get richer mentality. So it collapses. Not that let's say proof of work chains don't collapse to an oligopoly, but the difference in a proof of work chain is that if you are a mining pool, you have to keep committing resource in order to maintain your dominance. Whereas in proof of stake, that's not required. So that means that it becomes very, very difficult to I don't want to say, let's say, challenge the dominance, but to be able to at least pluralize. I don't even know if that's a word, but to make the dominance less of an oligopoly within a system like that. So for us, a proof of stake system was not ideal. But obviously, as you mentioned, we all know this, proof of work is like hugely wasteful in terms of energy. So what we decided to adopt was essentially something that was proof of work based. But because, as I mentioned before, we have these kind of separate nodes, the mempool nodes can sub-select using, and I'm not going to get too nerdy here, but they use a true random number generator to sub-select a component of the network to mine each block round. So instead of the whole network all trying to find a block at the same time, it's maybe like 1 to 10% of the network mining at any given time. So everybody else is idle, their machines can kind of sit, but a small group mine per block round. That group shifts across the network, so different people get to mine every round. But because the whole network is not mining all the time, the amount of energy that's consumed by the network in aggregate is like way, way, way less than proof of work, while not falling into like these traps that proof of stake has, right? So we were trying to look for this balance, I guess, between a proof of work system, that wasn't like energy wasteful, and this proof of stake system, which was faster and more eco-friendly, but had some, let's say, economic factors that we weren't super keen on.
Got it. Okay. I appreciate the explanation there. You got any thoughts on that, Kayla?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you're sticking to the true, Bitcoin ethos, which is decentralization is key. Proof of stake is not inherently decentralized in a lot of ways because then, you've got the issues with the DAO where people have voting problems. So I know that this isn't, DAO talk, but that is where my mind goes when you kind of bring that up. So have you guys thought about voting power in the future, or maybe like a nonprofit type vibe to do research and development? And would that consensus mechanism play into it? Because a lot of the issues on some of these chains that I highly respect have a lot of issues because of that proof of stake proof instead of the proof of work. Bitcoin doesn't have that clearly. And what would you call this overlap?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, we are looking at setting up a DAO currently, but this is more for like the governance of the protocol as a whole. As a question of like how does the token factor into the decision making for that governance? There, I think we still have a lot of questions that we need to resolve. We have toyed with the idea of potentially having a separated governance token that operates independently of the main economic token. But at this stage, these are still kind of unanswered questions that we definitely need answers to.
Well, hey, that's the point of governance, right? So, I mean, it's just interesting to see that you guys have thought this far ahead without even planning there. So it's a great thing, in my opinion. But what would you call this overlap now? Proof of stake, proof of work overlap.
We just call it eco proof of work because.
Okay, that's what I thought. I just wanted to write that down because are you guys the ones who invented this? I've never heard that before.
Yes, I think we are.
Awesome.
I'm gonna say
That's
yes.
really cool. I'm gonna have to look that up. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Awesome, Kayla. Okay, follow up for myself. On top of that, just talking a little bit more about the data management aspects here. Can you talk to me about the distinguishing features of your XGP solution? And then also, a lot of Web2 applications are based on streaming files. Do you support that? And if so, how do you do it?
Yeah, so as mentioned before, like like putting data, raw data on chain, even in encrypted state, is just like not feasible practically. So the way we do it is we essentially create unique encoding schemes. And again, I'll try not to get too technical. Just stop me if I do. But the idea is that we give each we essentially give people the ability to create a unique fingerprinting system for their data. So they can construct what is called an encoder, which essentially can rewrite data that is streamed through it with a unique fingerprinting system. So when you push data through this unique encoder, it carries the fingerprint of that encoder. And so if you're the owner of that encoder, you can say, I own this data, and more importantly, I can prove that I own this data from the chain directly. So you have all of this kind of trust, like I don't like the word, but you can say that there's a lot of this kind of like trustless chain-based ownership governance over data, which secures the data and secures the ownership and access to the data, but it doesn't require the data to be on chain. The extra benefit of this is that because it's just an encoder, it's a small file that lives on chain. You can not only push like off chain files through raw, but you can also use these in order to stream data on an ongoing basis. So if you wanted to set up, let's say, for example, a password protected stream of, I don't know, video, music, or any other kind of data, and you wanted to pass that access around, you wanted to rent it out, you wanted to sell it, you now could using this data rights system. So it gives a lot of flexibility in terms of like off-chain data that sits, quote unquote cold stored, versus something that's kind of live and streamed in the moment over time.
We're getting technical here today, folks. Hope everybody's enjoying. I know I have the right panel for this type of stuff. Go for it, Kayla.
I do have one question. So even though it's a little bit, technical. So that being said, we're doing token gated data here, which I love. How are we going to solve the problem of like, it's tough to get people to download a wallet? Are we going to run into that here in theory? Because you kind of have to have a wallet almost in this theory for your data, right? Or token gated data of sorts. Or is it more like a DApp? You just have to have the DApp.
Yeah, I think it would be even maybe like a layer below that, where we could even set up extensions, plugins for existing tools and products. Like in my ideal world, there would be a plugin for your Dropbox or for your Google Drive where you could just stream directly through the plugin, right? I don't need to download something extra or new.
So then it would be just as easy as like me making a Google account, right? Or
Exactly.
like that.
Yeah.
Very cool. That's a huge, huge hurdle that people face with, barrier to entry. So that's awesome. That's really good.
Sweet. Good questions there. Got a few more on my end too. Let's talk about being EVM compatible. Could existing dApps easily port to the AIBlock? And then if I was, let's say, developing a dApp, why would I maybe not choose EVM as my preferred platform?
Yeah, this is again like this is a question that comes up a lot, and it's a good question. The problem is it's quite difficult to answer in our system because the portability is definitely a feature that we're aiming to get to. Definitely not something we have now, but it's something that we're looking for in the future, where you could, let's say, take an Ethereum smart contract and port it directly into something on our system. For simpler implementations, I'm now thinking of things like, an ERC20 or an ERC721, something like this. You wouldn't even obviously need a smart contract. And there it's, I suppose, more a question of educating the audience to be able to do these things on the system in a much simpler way. But yeah, like let's say longer term, we're definitely looking at ways to be able to not only take an Ethereum smart contract, port it over onto our system, but also take some kind of special purpose contract written on our system and port it into something that would work in a Solidity or an EVM environment as well.
Got it. Okay, perfect. Appreciate the explanation there. And then I just want to talk like use cases because we're talking really technical here. And so it'd be good if we can get some use cases going so that people in the audience can understand. Maybe you can give us a few everyday examples.
Yeah. Our first use case is actually, I briefly mentioned it before, is an agricultural use case where we're specifically looking at farming communities in South America. Our first country that we're looking at is Brazil. And farmers there have a very unique, I wouldn't say unique, it's a problem that you find in many parts of the world where their currency fluctuation the fiat currency fluctuation is so volatile and sometimes so severe that if they plant for the growing season 6 months ahead of schedule, by the time the harvest is due in 6 months' time, they've often lost, pardon the language, shitloads of money because of currency fluctuations. And so they often look for ways to kind of stabilize the cost, the price at which they can sell, in their case, grain. So our first use case is actually to look at helping farmers access on-chain forwards contracts or futures contracts so that they can sell their grain 6 months past the contract date at maturity when the harvest is due at like a fixed pegged rate. So in simple terms, it's a way for farmers to be able to sell their crops at a predetermined price 6 months in the future. And for us, that's been a huge opportunity because here we get to kind of put into practice some of this financial contract stuff that I was speaking about before, where we have these on-chain contracts. We're using a standard called Actus, which is somewhat TradFi compatible. A lot of banks are Actus compatible. They accept Actus contracts. So this gives us an opportunity to even integrate with traditional banks. And we're looking at offering these forwards contracts to farmers to be able to kind of secure their grain production kind of 6 months into the future.
Very cool. Very cool. What's some of the ways that you recommend people in the audience, just kind of the call to action here? How can they get involved? Let's say they're not a developer, how does this apply to them? Maybe just if they wanted to go do more due diligence, where would they dive in? All those types of pieces.
Definitely on our main site, AIBlock.ch. Obviously follow us, on all the socials. Check us out on Discord, Twitter. We post a lot of updates there. We've got a few campaigns going. We're listing soon as well. So there are a bunch of different places where you'll probably find our name popping up if you're looking. And other than that, you can also follow members of the team directly. We often post about the products and stuff as well. And we're also heading to a number of conferences this year. So if you're in the Web3 space and you're at the major conferences, definitely come stop by, say hello, and we promise to be friendly.
Okay, I have another good question for you. We keep saying AI in the name here. How do you guys actually support AI? How is it integrated? Those kind of pieces. How big of a part of the company is it?
At this stage, we're kind of operating more at the data layer and starting there, solidifying that and making sure that our hope here is to essentially give people a way to, I wouldn't say necessarily protect their data, but certainly control and give them ownership of their data. Because, we're seeing this a lot lately, right? A lot of LLMs and a lot of the big Web2 tech companies, they're soaking and hoovering up like lots of data all over the web. And they're not always asking nicely or even for permission. And this is not necessarily, I think, a way that we want, the web to be going. So for us, I think a big focus is to first ensure that the data layer is secure, because that's obviously that's the fuel for all of these AI projects. And then once that's done, we can kind of look at ways to integrate this ownership and access into the AI layer and essentially use that to improve the way that these LLMs work in a kind of like ethical and responsible manner, especially in locations like the EU, where data regulation can potentially, I wouldn't say like kneecap, but it can kind of hobble research and development in the EU for AI specifically, because there is no way for people to really comply with these data regulations and still do like reasonable research on AI. The way that other jurisdictions, like for example China or the US, are able to do. So I think that's in short, tackling the data layer first, and then using that to kind of improve the AI layer as a second step is kind of our approach at this stage.
Awesome. We are going to move into final comments here, as we just have a few minutes at the top of the hour. Action, is there anything else on your mind here?
I'm just honestly thrilled that there's more and more people actually building before launching in this space, and making it easy for builders to actually do stuff around here. Because, yeah, I mean, the barrier to entry has been really high, and the simpler we can make things, the faster the space is going to grow as a whole.
Kayla, anything else for you?
Well, I think I actually got to ask all of my questions that I've been researching for my own kind of research idea. So thank you for one. And I'd like to know how I can get involved. I rarely, say that to like shill, but I would love to know how to get involved in this. And thanks to the Wolf team for connecting us.
She means it. I'll vouch for that. She definitely means it.
Sounds great. Well, definitely, it's like anybody, like everybody, feel free to reach out after this, and we'll definitely find a way to make that happen.
Sweet. Kyle, anything else on your mind?
This has been a great space, super positive vibes all around, and I shout out to AIBlock for spending the time to answer all of our questions with thoughtful responses, and we've asked some tough questions up here on the panel, and we don't make it easy for you here in the Wolf Den, but that just means that if you can handle the flame, then it speaks very well to you. So props to you for bringing the firepower today.
Cheers, appreciate it.
Perfect. All right, then Byron, I'll turn it over to you. Any other last comments? Anything you want to leave people with on the space today?
Just a thank you to everybody for a fantastic set of questions and a great conversation. As I said before, anybody who's excited to connect, please do. Happy to see what happens next. Thanks, everyone.
Perfect. Thank you to everyone for tuning in today. Shout out to AIBlock for being up here with us, as well as our all-star panel of Action, Kyle and Kayla. That'll be it for this space. I'm going to be back on Spaces probably in a few hours, thinking around 5:30 p.m. Eastern. And then tonight we have a big space with the Merlin Layer 2 that I think most of the speakers that are up here are going to be on as well. So looking forward to catching everybody on that. For the rest of y'all, have a great rest of your Tuesday. Appreciate you all tuning in, as always, on the Wolf Spaces.